Assalamualaikum. Our today's lab is on network address translator. So before going into the details of network address translator, basically है क्या? We will be going back towards IP version 4 and the number of addresses it can generate. Now you know कि आपका जो IP version 4 है वो up to it generates addresses up to 4 billion, right? But still, because the internet is growing so fastly, so all those addresses somehow were short, right? आपको be needing more addresses, so that's how we switch toward IP version 6. But still, our IP version 4 revived by using NAT, right? Network address translator. So normally this is a setup of a network. जिसमें an internet service provider is connected with the gateway, and there are two set of IPs, and one is the outside IP address, and this one is the IP address linking with all the set of systems, right, which are connected to your router default gateway, right? So in this specific scenario, these are not hidden, right? These are public IP addresses. It means that these will be can't be reused, right? Because they are already occupied IP addresses, so we cannot use these set of IP addresses again somewhere else, right? So here comes the concept of NAT, that when all the IP addresses are public, then the reusing concept wasn't there, and they the designers were falling short of IP addresses, so they went toward the solution in the form of NAT. So NAT resolved the problem of shortening of IP addresses, and they fix a specific set of IPs only for private IP addresses, right? Specifically in class A, class B, and class C. Now, class C. Now you can reuse these set of IP addresses like in your network as private IP address for, you can say, up to 50, 60, 80, 90 times, 1000 million, whatever, how many, let's say designing 10 million 10 million private IP addresses. Now every time you can use these set of IP addresses, and there's no such issue of the overlapping of the IP addresses or reusing issue, because we can use them multiple times. So that's the plus point of implementing network address translator, right? So it translates one IP address into another. This is a specific technology in which when a router is placed in between and we enable NAT on our router, it is simply translating that specific IP address on the inside of your inside network. This specific IP address is translated into another IP address and to the whole other world. This entire network is visible in the form of just this one single IP address. Rest of all the IP addresses are private. They are just known to your default router, and that's how we enable NAT on your router, right? So NAT is basically a protocol which translate an interior host private IP address into a public IP address for outgoing traffic. So it translates your public IP address to an internal private address for incoming traffic. As I said to you previously, it actually hides this entire network to the outside world, right? This entire network is a private network and it is not linked with the outside world. To the outside world, this is the will be our only address that will be visible. So that is how NAT will be working. So there are, what's the benefit? It prolongs the life of your IP version 4. Elsewhere, IP version 4 अब तक यूज ना हो रहा होता, rather it would have been replaced completely by IP version 6, but still you can see IP version 4 in your PCs, in your systems. That is because of this specified technology, right? So NAT improves, yes, क्योंकि it's hiding an entire set of addresses, so it's kind of a way of improving your security as well. Now there are three basic types of NAT. One is static, one is dynamic, and the third one is port address translator, right? So what's the difference? So let's start with the first one, which is a static NAT. So static NAT is actually assigning an IP address to inside server. Let's say you have a network, and you are connecting with this router the set of systems, right? So every set of system has itself an IP address, and static NAT will be assigning to every server a static IP, external IP address, right? So it will be fixed, right? ये हो सकता है कि आपके स्पेसिफिक सर्वर को लेट्स से 4 आवर्स के लिए कोई ट्रैफिक नहीं आ रही, बट स्टिल दैट external IP address is fixed and allocated for this, just only this web server, right? So similarly, an external IP address is fixed for this web server and this web server, and this is how, um, let's say for example, if this was the IP address, let's say 1.2.3.4 was fixed for your this web server. Similarly, 1.2.3.5 was fixed for your this server. Similarly, जो आपका third server है उसके लिए भी आपने एक IP address fix किया. Now all of them are on a same network, right? But we are fixing an external IP address for these servers, right? Now these are again reachable with the help of using NAT, and this is a useful setup because they are connecting to internal and an external system, but it is wasteful because you are using an expensive public IP addresses, a whole set of expensive public IP address. So yes, NAT deals with more with incoming traffic, and this is the major drawback of static NAT, is that it is using a whole set of static and public IP addresses. So to overcome this issue, they came across with the next concept of dynamic NAT, in which a list of IP pool was provided to a router, and it just randomly assigned any IP address to a specific system. For example, if this system want to communicate with the outer world, it just from its pool of external IP addresses, it just assign one IP address to this system, right? Similarly, दूसरा अगर करना चाहता है connect या this system, it will assign from its pool of IP address a random external IP address जो उसके pool में present है, जिस तरह DHCP में आपने देखा था, right? So it is randomly assigning any specific IP address is not fixed for a specific system unless and until that specific system is connecting to the outer world. जब तक that system is connecting, तब तक ही आप उस system को एक random public IP address provide किया जाएगा, right? So there's no fixed specific IP address for a specific system, right? So this is kind of more secure because it is every system IP address is continuously changing, because whenever a system wants to communicate with the internet, it is provided with a different IP address, right? So as compared to static NAT, it is a better option using dynamic NAT, right? Because the IP address here is changing, right? So let's move toward the third option, which was PAT. So how this specific procedure works, इसमें क्या होता है कि there is only port numbers की form में the data is transferred, and nothing additional has been added, right? There is only one IP address जिसकी terms में आपका entire, it's kind of one to many, right? Means all of these systems are just translated in the form of one single IP address, right? For example, if it's 192.168.100.1 this system, and let's say it's port number 80, so it will go to router, and router will assign it same IP address with a port number, right? And now this number will be the number which is always changing, right? So जब भी बाहर से traffic आएगी, it will be coming for this IP address and this port number, and what router will be doing, it will be just changing the IP address, swap it, ठीक है, वो swap कर देगा and वो वहाँ पर इस IP address को place कर देगा, and it will send the packet to the specified IP address, right? So it's kind of, the procedure is kind of dealing with port numbers, right? So router understand this entire traffic in the form of port numbers, because it has a list of data which is, it's kind of matching the IP address with port number to this one single IP address and a different port number, right? So when any external traffic come for this port number, it will only change this IP address with this IP address, and that's how your PAT version is working, right? So now it can very big benefit of PAT is that it is kind of handling, it is just using one public IP address, which is a plus, very plus point, and it is using just one public IP address for a set of entire network, right? The entire network is visible to the internet in the form of just single one public IP address, right? So this is how you will be configuring your set of commands, right? You will be defining your inside source when you are enabling your static NAT, right? So IP NAT inside source static, and your if this is your network and you're hiding your server and ये आपका gateway है, and let's say your server address is this, so you will be hiding this address with this one, right? So router को whenever any system wants to communicate, the server will be visible with this address, right? And plus आपने define करना है कि this serial port is for your IP NAT outside. Yes, ये आपका outside IP address है जो visible होगा to entire world, and this interface is your inside NAT address, right? Now when you are moving toward PAT configuration, वहाँ पे आपकी minor changes आएंगी, because at that case आपको एक access list चाहिए होगी, right? Because you are actually configuring entire pool for your one set of IP address, right? So you will be using the command of access list with an identifier number. Now this is a specific a number, standard number, right, which range from 1 to 99 and 1002. So you can randomly pick any number here, and the next option is permit. Now when you allow the permit, every single packet is transferred accordingly. Else if you choose the drop option rather than deny option, in that case your packets are basically dropped before going to a specified next parameter, right? So anyhow, we are dropping the parameter matching parameter option here, and we will be adding the commands in this version, right? So access list number, access list number, that's one, and permit, and then I'm allowing the IP address because I'm enabling my PAT for this side of networks, right? So in sub addresses go, I will be hiding with this address, right? So I'm using my all set of addresses with a mask of this, means any possible address it is actually specifying host, right? होस्ट को स्पेसिफाई करने के लिए यहाँ पे 255 यूज हुआ है. इट मीन यहाँ पे जो भी नंबर हो, every possible system which is connected in this specific network, you are actually hiding it, right? So IP NAT inside source is number one, and then you are specifying your interface, right? Interface is on your serial number 2 overload, right? This is your serial number 2, and you are hiding this specific interface, right? So what else? You will specify your serial number 2 is your IP NAT outside, and serial interface FA00, which is this side, is your IP NAT inside, right? And this is how you will be enabling your PAT on your system. Now you will understand it more when you will be watching your lab. One thing more, that if you're going for dynamic NAT, because you know that हमें उसमें pool define करना होता था. So when you're defining pool, IP NAT pool, आपको pool का name suggest करना होगा, and then you will suggest कि आपने external IPs में से जो भी set use करना है, उसका starting क्या होगा, end IP address क्या होगा, और mask क्या होगा. It means कि आपने कुछ इस तरह से अपनी command लिखनी होगी, IP NAT pool, let's say pool name is this, and this is the starting up to the ending IP addresses, and net mask is this, right? So these are the set of additional commands जो आप dynamic NAT में use कर सकते हैं, but I guess we will be going through static NAT because that's the basic, and PAT because that's the better version of implementing NAT, right? So I guess that's it. Yes, web page पे भी before going into the details आपको थोड़ा सा web page layout बता देती हूँ. Okay, but let's leave it for the next part, right? So this is all for your theory session.